Mr. Alex Morrell, welcome to the Without Limits podcast.
Thank you for having me, mate.
It's been a long time coming, to be honest. You've been pretty instrumental in my life of recent years in keeping me fit and healthy. I've obviously pushed the body pretty hard for a number of years, but more recently into new sports, new environments, and as often happens when you toe the line, you end up breaking. And you've been pretty instrumental, like I say, in keeping me fit and just being a sounding board and looking after me. So I appreciate all that help you've given me. And now I get to talk to you about physio, rehab, and prehab. And we've got 60 minutes or so to make it sound sexy, because this is something that, you know all too well, many people don't really care for until it's too late. And I think in the sports and in the areas that we find ourselves training and coaching in, and also now with what people are looking to do with their bodies, it's going to become all the more real and prevalent for people, particularly as they begin to age. And like I say, explore new stimuluses, new sports. So hopefully there's going to be so much value for people in this episode.
There's a little bit of pressure on me there to add some sex appeal to rehab, but we'll roll with it. So
we'll get there.
Yeah.
Before we start, in usual fashion, I ask everyone what Without Limits means to them. So what does Without Limits mean to you?
When I texted you yesterday asking about what questions you were going to ask, I knew this was going to come, and I tried not to overthink it. In the same way you've very kindly acknowledged that you feel I've been quite instrumental in some of the things that you've done in the last few years, I would say likewise. And I think from my perspective, Without Limits has really transformed over the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years for me, in terms of not actually knowing where the boundary ends. And one of the most sort of, I always draw back to it, one of the most sort of impactful books that I've ever read was Nassim Taleb about becoming anti-fragile. And I try and carry that over into lots of different elements of my life, both personally and professionally. I think with a professional head on, there's a huge tendency within like the medical rehab type world to push people down this sort of like fragile mindset and almost, right, these are your limits, when actually I think the job of me as a professional is to open someone up and actually, we talk about this as a team at Move, actually expanding someone's vision about what is possible with their body and where they can take it beyond it just been from a rehab perspective. But then from a personal perspective, what I've achieved over the last 4 years far exceeds even my wildest of dreams. Like I always wanted to just worked in sport, loved it, and then wanted to reclaim a little bit more balance within my life, start having a family, having the time to and the freedom to do what I wanted to do. And I left sport to work 15 hours a week and match my salary. I'm not working 15 hours a week anymore, but all of the goals and ambitions that I ever sort of dreamt about have far been exceeded far quicker than I could ever imagine. And I think for me now, I just don't put a limit on it. I'm a bit like, I'm going to try and I'm going to give it everything, and I'll sacrifice the things that I'm comfortable sacrificing. I've gone on a journey of understanding myself and knowing where my values are, and I will never sacrifice things around around family and things like that. But outside of that, I'll do what I believe needs to be done to achieve it. And if I don't quite get there, then it's a learning opportunity. It sounds cliche, but it genuinely is. And if I don't reach the top of Everest, I might just reach base camp, but there's a significant amount of progress from where I was and where in the past I maybe wouldn't have probably tried or had the confidence to try.
Yeah, that's powerful. And there's quite a few bits there to unpack. I think, ultimately, let's just use me as the example here. When it comes to like picking the physio, given traditional kind of perceptions of what physiotherapy is, you're broken, it's going to get you back to a baseline. That wasn't going to be sufficient for someone that's looking to achieve what I want to achieve with my body. And so the reason I was attracted to you is because the way you think about physiotherapy, it's actually the way you think about life, right? And if anyone follows you, it's what you've done with your business, it's now what you've done with your family, it's what you've done with your own training, and also what you've done with your clients. You've not necessarily taken them back to a baseline. Well, in fact, you haven't. You've taken them back to going beyond where they were before they got injured. So I think you are someone obviously that lives without limits. I think a lot of your recent content is very is a sort of testament to that. And you referenced there kind of being in professional sport and then coming across to physiotherapy. And I think many people, maybe like me, the traditional experiences of physiotherapy and perception of what a physiotherapist is, again, probably speaks to the fact that we might not find it too sexy and want to listen to what a physio says. But why should someone listen to you? What is your kind of experience, and how have you got to where you are as a professional?
I think I'm quite lucky because I failed in my first attempt to become a physio. I always did really well at school without really trying, if I'm honest, and then went into A-level, and I just, after numerous arguments with my mum, I wasn't allowed to go to college. I was pushed into the formal education. Go do your A-levels and you'll go do a good university degree and X, Y, and Z after that. And I failed all my A-levels, had to reset every single module, and I was unsuccessful in getting onto a physiotherapy degree. But in hindsight, that was a blessing because it meant that I went and did sports science, and injury management was the degree title, but it was sports science, strength and conditioning with a module in sports rehab. But actually that gave me a set of skills and an understanding of training, primarily those two sort of disciplines, which do largely interlink, that when I went and actually started to try, did well in that degree and got onto a master's in physiotherapy, because I still knew that was the route to get me into sport easier. Like sports rehab roles are there, but they're not really, they're taken up with physios and S&C coaches who've transitioned into that route. And it also opened a door for me to go to Australia, which was something that was sort of in the picture at that time. But I went and did my master's, and the amount of education around strength and conditioning principles is literally non-existent. We might have done one lecture and we were told to give 3 sets of 10. Irregardless of what the exercise prescription was, it was like, give clients 3 sets of 10. And we can deep dive into lots of different reasons why. It's an NHS-funded degree. When you go and work in the NHS, resource is at its absolute minimum, and you need to play on the safe side and things like that. But ultimately, failing to get there made me a significantly better physio because I understood strength and conditioning, and I could then apply those skills, that knowledge base, to actually rehab someone, one, in a way that is better. It's going to take them and actually develop them athletically and actually go, right, this is where you are at the moment. Potentially, when we go through your testing, these are some of the reasons why you've broken down and why you've got injured. This is the needs analysis of what you want to get back to. And these are the steps that we're going to take to do that. And we just reverse engineer that. But without this strength and conditioning principles that I'd already learned, it would be impossible. And you can see why so many physios get funneled into, I'm going to do treatment, I'm going to do massage, manipulation, dry needling, acupuncture as a primary service. And then I'm going to give you 3 sets of 10 glute exercises, because they don't get told any different. And I know what, from my perspective, where I put my training hat on, I know what I would enjoy a lot more.
Yeah, very good. And again, I think that speaks to part of the reason why, I identified you as someone that I could trust to sort of look after my training. It's because of that strength and conditioning background. Can you unpack a little bit more? Because I know you were in professional sport with rugby league. What did you learn there about strength and conditioning, and then also the desire to go on to physiotherapy? And how have you combined? What was your understanding of combining the two, and how important they could be for someone in that acute phase after injury, but then also that long-term approach to getting them back on the pitch and developing their athletic qualities?
I think one of the first things that I always reflect on from working in professional rugby, and it's absolutely crazy what rugby league and rugby union athletes, I worked in both disciplines, put their bodies through for the salary that they actually earn and what they're going to have after the career. But what they're able to put their body through is unbelievable. And it really made me realize what the human body is capable of. It is the most adaptable organism on the planet. And yes, you may need to have some serious discussions around well-being and things like that. And there's, when you're making a decision whether someone's going to play or not, it's my opinion, a doctor's opinion, the player's opinion, which is the most important, and then the coaching staff's opinion. But what players actually play with that spectators don't know about is absolutely incredible. And that, for me, I've taken out of sport. And obviously everyone's mindset's slightly different towards it, but actually trying to instill the belief that the human body is really resilient and we just need to feed it the right things and the right inputs, both from a physiological and a physical perspective to build its strength, power, whatever physical quality it is, but in turn, doing that in a progressive way and giving appropriate feedback to highlight to the person so that mentally and from a psychological perspective that they see themselves getting better, they feel better, and in turn their perceived confidence, resilience, everything like that rises. And I think that's one of the most impactful things I've taken from working in rugby. From a strength and conditioning perspective and linking it to physio, all that rehab is strength and conditioning under a constraint of the injury. And we need to, whenever I work with anybody, whether it's your gran or whether it's a professional athlete, the thing I want to establish as early as possible is a decent blueprint of what that person's physical capabilities are, because that tells me a lot about where they are currently versus where they want to be. And yes, you may have, and we work with a lot of people with ACL injuries, Achilles ruptures that are significant injuries, and in the acute phases, we can't do a lot directly to the injury, but there's significant amounts that we can do to make them a better athlete, even at that stage, providing we're not increasing risk of infection through sweating and things like that, that is going to pay off in the long run. So, for example, let's run through an ACL rehab. Your aerobic capacity is X. Let's say it's 50 for an ease of number, and we want to get you to 70 because that's what we know from the research base is a minimum standard for someone that plays your sport. We can start working on that from as early as physically possible, where actually a lot of rehab approaches miss that, because and what ends up happening is you don't just stay at 50 because you're not dealing with that physical quality and creating an adaptation and forcing adaptation through training. You decondition, and actually when you go back and play sport, you're less fit than when you started. And let's say you play rugby, it's an 80-minute game, you're 60 minutes into the game, and your fitness, which was at 50 when you got injured, you've gone back at 40, you're accumulating fatigue far earlier in the game. So even though you've gone through a rehab program which has worked on strength and power and things like that, your aerobic capacity is letting you down and actually degrading those physical qualities earlier, and in turn, your risk of injury is increasing. And that's from an injury risk perspective. Like, if we actually just go, all right, how well are you performing? Well, you're less fit than where you were at the beginning, so you're performing worse.
Yeah, really good. You mentioned something there that's quite made me smile about, I suppose, just the pain tolerance of professional rugby players or athletes in general. I had someone on the podcast recently that we were talking about that ability just to get up and get sessions done when muscles are sore and you're fatigued, which is sometimes the right thing to be doing. This understanding of I guess pain. Rugby players, have a surgery that most people would try and get done the next day at the end of the season, and they kind of play with that. So what's in your experience with the everyday person versus the rugby player, people's experience of pain? How should we approach pain when we feel it?
I think, and this isn't me, by the way, saying that and putting rugby players on a pedestal and saying that what they do is right. Like, if you have a traumatic injury that needs dealing with, we should look at getting it dealt with. But in performance sport, the lens at which you look at certain things through changes slightly. You've got to think and factor in so many different things. It's stage of the season. Have we got important games coming up? For the athlete, there's contract talks. If you're not playing, are you much less likely to get a contract? Is your contract salary going to be reduced? It's so multifactorial in terms of the sporting side of things that I mentioned. But in terms of sport, in terms of pain, to keep it as simple as possible, pain is a sensation, which is an output of the brain and the nervous system. And that output is derived from the inputs that are coming in. So your brain always knows where your body is in space. If I touch you, it understands that something's touched you. If a muscle stretches, a muscle contracts, it knows all the time what's going on. And it's picking up these inputs, and it's constantly making decisions to keep you safe. Your brain and your nervous system's number one priority is going to be keep you safe and keep you alive. And if it perceives these inputs as a problem, a potential reaction of the brain and the nervous system is to create a painful sensation. Like if I touched a hob, my brain knows that from the input, bang, straight in, take your hand off, create pain, stop you doing what you're doing. Physical, because of the physical trauma, but there can also be, there's a lot of people that have scans that don't have a problem, that have pain, because there's this mismatch between the input and what the brain feels safe with. And that's a game where that initial blueprint as part of the assessment is really, really important, because we can go, right, you're trying to complete these tasks, and that's going to put this input into your brain and into your nervous system. But you're trying to complete these tasks at a level which is below what physically we want you to be at. So it's no wonder that that's stressing the brain and stressing the nervous system, and that in turn is creating this painful sensation, reducing range of motion because of muscle tone, all these protective reactions that my job as the physio and the rehab coach is to go, right, these are the things that we need to put into the system alongside some potentially specific movement patterns that we want to work on, alongside building the physical quality of strength and power and things like that, that actually reassures the brain and the nervous system that it can tolerate the demands that have been placed on it, i.e. the input, so then it doesn't have to have that protective response with the painful reaction.
Can I train that? So is physical training, is that increasing my capacity to deal with pain? Is there ways in which people can train that?
Absolutely. Just following a progressive training plan is going to increase the capacity. Tolerance is a good word. Yeah, tolerance. It's essentially widening your buffer for error, and you want to build as big a base to reach as high a peak as possible. And in the base is strength and aerobic capacity. I've spoke about this at the summit and stuff like that last year with you guys, and there's different physical qualities which do hold more precedent from an injury prevention perspective. Strength and aerobic capacity are the two. And then above that, we've got movement quality, we've got power, like from plyometrics, we've got all different physical qualities. But absolutely, the better you are athletically, the more likely or the more resilient to pain and injury you are.
Do you put strength ahead of movement quality?
I've gone back and forward on this a hell of a lot, because the answer is no, because we want to nail the movement quality and then apply strength to it. But once you start reaching those higher percentages from a strength perspective and you're training that adaptation, you're also going to get a reduction in movement quality, just because you're stressing your body at such a level that it can't pick everything all at once. So you'll see people that lift world record deadlifts, squats and things like that, and you go, that's poor technique. But it's also a max effort. And the thing that earns the right to do that is the repetition and the consistency over time. And by time, I don't mean months, I mean years worth of training, and laying a really big foundation again that allows you just that a bit more of a buffer from a movement quality perspective. But all the time, 99.9% of your time, your strength work has to be underpinned with movement quality.
That's a really nice piece just to pick up on. So people going into a new training program or a new training style, or exposed to a new sport, what you're suggesting is in training, 90+% of your time needs to be focused on movement quality or lifting within a constraint of maintaining good technique. And again, that's a little bit subjective, but good technique, with a view that when you're pushing above a 95 or 99% effort, technique going out the window, you've earned the right to be able to be there and you're still safe.
Earned the right's the perfect comment. I can draw from a conversation I had last Monday with one of my clients, and he was really frustrated. He'd done 5x5 front squats. And he's like, oh, I've not put any weight on the bar. And he's only been training consistently and progressively for 6 months. But actually, all 5 sets were at 90% of his 3-rep max, and his quality of movement was significantly better. Even if he hadn't have increased the weight from the previous week and his movement quality had got better, that is progressive overload. That is seeing adaptations come to light, and it'll make him more efficient and then allow him in the next block of training or over the next couple of blocks of training to see the rewards having earned the right by improving his movement quality. Yeah.
I think that's, again, a really nice thing just a quick double click on, because you see it in our gym members here. Like, I think because lifting more weight is obviously how people register that they're getting stronger, but the variance in set 1 to set 2 when the weight increases changes. And I think it's something that, I admire someone that lifts with really great form when they're training, and there's just no difference between set and set, even their top set. And you hear people that are very experienced lifters, and you've just referenced it there, talking about, your warm-up sets looking like your top sets when we're not working at 95+%. And I think that's just really important for people to pick up on right now. If we are thinking about this like longevity piece and training for life and trying to steer clear of injury across that journey, it is really making sure that you're prioritizing really good technical movement, or whatever movement quality looks like for you, being able to replicate that through your working sets across different movements.
Absolutely. And you've had Ollie Patrick on here, and he spoke about different things that are important to extending quality of life, and muscle mass and strength are right up there in terms of the importance. And if you can move a joint through more range of motion, you're going to stimulate more muscle mass and you gain more strength off the back of that. So both from a performance perspective right now, but also longevity, it's huge. So I think a large problem is the comparison piece, isn't it? And both the internal comparison of I need to progress every single week, but is that a reaction to the external comparison of what people are doing in your immediate environment within the gym and the training session that you're in? But also when you sit there scrolling, you see someone like yourself who looks a certain way, performs a certain way, and I might go, right, I want to do that, so I need to get to those weights that Ollie's got to, but they haven't seen the 20 years worth of repetition and consistency that someone's put in there. And honestly, the amount of people who we work with both online and in person, that their main problem is that they just haven't done the basics savagely well, consistently over time, and built a bigger foundation before they've gone and tried to do the marathon, the ultra, the really fast 5K, the CrossFit functional fitness competition, even the high, we could pick any modality. They just haven't earned the right to try and do what they're doing. Double days. I could just go on and on.
Yeah. It's something that I get tagged in loads of training, people training, so lots of training footage on Instagram. And if I don't share, it's for 2 reasons. One, I've shared too much that day, in which case I don't want to keep littering my stories with someone else's training footage, although I feel very privileged and grateful that people are tagging and are proud of what they're doing. Or 2, it's because you're moving like shit. And a lot of the time it is the latter. And it pains me to know that someone will be on one of our programs and moving like that. And more often than not, I'll try and coach them through the DMs, or just like suggest ways in which they can try and improve and tidy up that technique. But it largely comes down to the fact that, people do glorify what is the tonnage on the bar, and that's the thing that they're proud of, rightly so, because it's a objective way of showing your strength, but not when you're sacrificing your technique and your body's all over the place. So if you are listening to this and you do film yourself training, whether it's a squat or a deadlift or pick any movement, if there is big variance in your sets when you're videoing yourself, when you get to sets that are slightly tougher, I'd suggest you're skipping steps, and you're either going to lead to increased risk of injury, or you're skipping steps and you're actually going to cap out on strength capability, because you're not going to go through full range of motion, therefore taking advantage of full strength capabilities. Moving into, how do people get injured then? Well, how do injuries occur? What's we've talked about sort of pain, obviously some pain, good pain, some pain not. We've talked about trauma, it's very obvious for people if you for example, my knee, you snap your ACL, you're injured. Yeah. But how do people get injured when it's not, like a trauma or an injury where there's like, in contact sport?
Yeah. So I will typically put them into 2 buckets, really. You've got your traumatic, and I even put a post about this yesterday. Your traumatic contact-based injuries, which largely you're not going to be able to avoid. It's just an unfortunate byproduct of the activity that you're doing, or you've just been unlucky, essentially. Outside of that, the demands that you're placing upon your body under exceed your physical capabilities. And, well, and I will say that with an asterisk, because the analogy I always come back to and draw back to is Man City spend millions and millions of pounds trying to keep their athletes fit and healthy throughout the season, to the point where they roll up mattresses, pillows, fly them around the world, have special sprays that they spray at home so their sleep conditions are the same as at home as when they're away, trying to optimize everything, and they still experience injuries. I don't know what they're like physically, but they're throwing millions at it. And there is the luck element, the unknown, the multifactorial. I've had an argument with my missus, I'm stuck in traffic, I've got financial stress, whatever it is, all of these things play into the pain and the injury bucket. But the things that you can control are the physical qualities and how you perform athletically. And the reason I pause is that I'm always hesitant about labeling it as athletically, because there's a lot of people that won't think of themselves as athletic or athletes, but the same principles apply. Looking at it through a performance lens and going, right, these are the things that I want to do and I'm aiming for and I'm striving for, and this is where I currently am. I need to lay these bricks to allow me to safely and effectively do that. And whatever those bricks are is specific to that one person. And it all draws back to, like I mentioned earlier, the assessment, the needs analysis of the thing that they want to get, and reverse engineering what that process looks like. And it's the same in so many different things. Like, obviously, I work with you guys in Boardroom and Gym Owners Network, and it's like, vision, what's the end goal? Right, where are you now? Reverse engineer what steps you're going to take to get there. But ultimately, if the things that you're trying to do exceed your capability, even if we just go as simple as picking something up off the floor and you feel your back go, is that because you haven't got adequate range of motion through your hips? So it's actually your body's ability to reach down and touch the floor on the right-hand side has exceeded what it can do. So your body and your brain has had to borrow range of motion from somewhere else, and it's not happy to do that. Whether that's caused physical damage that you'd see under scan and ultrasound and MRI, or whether that's just a protective response of the brain to say, right, stop what you're doing, Ollie. That's not right for you at the moment. You need to address X, Y, and Z and go through the assessment to understand what X, Y, and Z are. But essentially, it all comes back to, is what you're doing exceeding the demands that your body is able to tolerate at that moment in time?
So for the listener, it's like, let's say I've got a goal, and some people obviously just training for life and to make life feel a little bit easier. But let's say we have got a goal like Hyrox. So either I haven't done the reverse engineering of Hyrox back to the competition back to where I'm now and understand the needs of the training to get there, or I've given myself not enough time, in which case I'm having to accelerate my progress through the training, therefore too much exposure, and I'm breaking. The two things are kind of intertwined.
Absolutely, yeah.
So are you suggesting? Obviously, there's a best case scenario, and then there's like some nuance to whether people need to do this. Are you suggesting that everyone should, at start point, I'm going to take on this goal, go through some testing, do a needs analysis of the training and the sport, and then let's say, for example, I've only got 6 weeks. Well, that doesn't make sense because I can't get to the goal that I want. It's either readjust my goal or move the date of the race.
I think putting my coach's hat on, it all comes down to communication and feedback and setting appropriate expectations. And there's been a lot of difficult discussions that I've had with people, both healthy and injured, who have, and very respectfully, have aspirational goals of what they want to achieve. And that's fantastic. And you'd never want to discourage that. But it's actually, right, let's go. This is your first, we'll use Hyrox again. This is your first Hyrox. This is where you currently are. You have this goal of, let's say, 1 hour and 10 minutes, but actually you've never even ran 8K before, let alone layering fatigue on top of it. And then all of the emotional factors of the day, which you'll never be able to quantify, but just the heightened heart rate and the excitement and the nerves of going in there is going to have a physiological effect and create probably just ambient levels of fatigue before you're even going into the event. And it's just from putting my coach's hat on, having honest discussions.
If someone doesn't have access to someone like you because they've not been injured before, and this is resonating, they're understanding it, but it's not resonating enough to go, okay, I'm going to get a coach. What does that person do? Is it, the ideal is, get on a program, speak to a coach, but is there something someone can do to assess themselves right now to know, okay, here's where my baseline is, that I can move forward? I know it's difficult without the context of the sport, but.
Absolutely. I think you've just got to look at it logically and go, right, we'll go high rocks. It's an 8K race with elements of fatigue on top of it. Can you do all of the components of that race independently before you even go into it? Could you run 8K? Could you do 100 wall balls? Could you carry a kettlebell as far as you need to go? Could you do a max effort on a ski erg and a rower for 1K? If you can do all of those things, then yes, it's maybe an appropriate goal. But you need to be able to develop the skill of doing those things in isolation before you add fatigue on top of it, chaos on top. Like, you've done a lot of high rocks, I've done a couple. It is chaotic when you're out there. So again, that is a factor within doing the event. Okay, let's use a half marathon. I guess a good thing to actually talk about would be when I was working in professional sport and we were returning an athlete back to performance or back to play. One of the sessions that was really important to us was a worst case scenario session. And obviously, with all of the different tech and things like that, we would understand a huge amount of data about you, the athlete, and we'd know in a half, you might run 4,000 meters with 500 meters of high speed running with X amount of accel decels and X amount of sprint efforts. So as part of my rehab planning, I would take you to 110% of that session to know that you are physically capable of doing it. So there's the logical approach to it of, can I do all of those things independently, and have I got the physical qualities and the skill to do that? And then can I do it with added layers of fatigue and chaos on top of it? But then actually to be really confident in avoiding injury, can I do more? So let's say you're doing a half marathon. Can you run 25K? I'm not saying that you need to do that in your training or anything like that. But again, if you can run 25K, you can pretty confidently say you're going to run the 21K.
Yeah, I think this is the crux of it, right? Like, people coming into fitness, the comparison or maybe the influence or peer pressure of other people doing it, not giving themselves enough time. And then it goes back to that saying that we use a lot of earning the right. We've touched on a few things here, high rocks and half marathons, obviously being the most prevalent of what a typical someone coming from strength going into kind of hybrid fitness or functional fitness would look to take on as a challenge, and rightly so. Two big moments, two great things to train for. What are the most common injuries you're finding now with that increase of running, whether it's high rocks or half marathon, for people to sort of maybe look out for? And then we'll just discuss. I sort of asked you, what could people be doing right now if they don't have access to you? We can maybe discuss how you'd construct a 10-15 minute prehab piece before a run or before a training session, so that people can start to tick that box, and hopefully some of the listeners can take that away and then implement it into their training.
Can I come back to that? I think one of the things, when I finished talking, I thought about TAR.
Yeah. And
I think it's an important thing to understand the person's motivations for doing what they're doing. And obviously TAR was what, 230?
It was 270, I think. So for those that don't know, TAR was the Transalpine race that myself, Jens, Charlie and Miles did last year. 270K across the Alps, across 7 days, 17,000 meters of elevation. And we took Alex as part of our support team.
Bus driver. So the reason I brought it up is I think it's important to know someone's motivation, because there's no way that you can physically prepare yourself for something like that. And an event, and it came back to the first time I did a high rocks, and I thought it was unbelievable that me as a very average person, the world elite, and someone doing, I've got her pictured in my head running around, doing it in over 2 hours, were all on there. But to her and to that person, the motivation for doing it might have been to push her boundaries and see what she's capable of. And in which case, you've got to understand what your motivation is to do it, because you could never train worst case scenario.
That's very fair. And I think this goes back to Gio, because I think we've got to take what we're saying with a pinch of salt, because many people could train in 4 weeks, having no training before, 4 high rocks, complete it and have no injury. But I think if you're someone that continues to have that mindset towards the way you train and show up and prepare, you are someone that it's a ticking time bomb. And many people can get through a whole rugby career without getting injured and very lucky. So there is an element of luck towards this. But I suppose we're just saying, and I say this from a place of experience. There is nothing worse if you're someone that likes to live a very healthy, active lifestyle. You love training. It's the part of your day that is the most enjoyable, and for yourself, if you can't train to the capability that you either used to or you want to. It's just like being ill. It's like being bedbound. It's horrendous. And injuries that are arguably slightly longer in period than illness, they're crippling for people's both physical and psychological kind of well-being. And so I think some of these things are just like, it's just about being aware and mindful of it, and start to maybe reassess to how you approach your own kind of fitness and training. So let's come back to that one then. So what are the most common injuries? Obviously, I'm sure there are, we spoke about ACL, but I think that's more towards, sporting context and trauma. What are the most common injuries you're coming up against now with the increase of running high rocks, half marathons, etc.?
Whether this is a byproduct of our marketing and the content that I put out there, but we see a lot of knees. In particularly, if I just go lower limb, overuse injuries. And again, it comes back to the physical preparedness. Are you physically prepared to tolerate the demands of the training program that you're trying to partake in and complete? But also the factors outside of the training is how well are you recovering? What's your sleep like? What's your nutrition like? I know personally, I've put a lot more effort into my nutrition over the last 8 weeks, and I feel significantly better both when I train and outside of training. I'm more present at home. My energy's better with my family. I'm more present, and my energy's better at work. It carries over into everything, and actually nailing those basics is going to go a long way to preventing injuries in general, but especially overuse injuries, and allowing appropriate levels of recovery. We see a lot of tendon-based injuries. Again, it falls into that overuse category. And I think one of the things that's important to talk about is what people think an overuse injury is just solely a result of too much load in too short a period of time and not enough recovery. But let's say you have a patellar tendinopathy on your right knee. So the tendon that sits at the front of your kneecap attaches to your shin bone. Let's say that's irritated. If it was just solely down to load, why aren't all tendons irritated? Why isn't the left knee, why isn't the Achilles on both sides? And that, again, is where we come back to a detailed assessment of understanding your specific story, your specific testing results, and go, you might have had an old right ankle injury, which you never properly rehabbed. And actually, when we test some of your power, like single leg hopping type metrics, you have a 20% deficit in power versus the non-affected side. And I think it's really, really important to have a well-rounded program that takes care of lots of those things. A lot of people skip the prep, which is usually where the bits that will supplement the actual training is, your plyos, your movement work, and they're just like, right, whether it's time or whether it's actually not understanding the intent of it. But I just think people could just do a lot better by just doing the basics really, really well.
Let's pick up on that, because I think if people don't want to invest in the cost of testing and a coach, etc., let's just give people the basics, right? And you reference it there, like the prep work. And this is, we see it in our gyms, and we know it's going to be on the program. You put a warm up in there, people overlook it. And I think the key here, especially coming from you, and hopefully people can listen to it because it's coming from a credible or authoritative voice, it's like the prep work is the training as well. Like view it as the training, view it as the accessory, view it as whatever, but just put some importance on it. For running, let's just try and keep it quite clearly defined so that you can actually answer it without needing to say it depends. But for running, whether that's a high rock space session where there's running intervals in it, or whether that's a training for your half marathon. What are the keys that we want to try and be preparing the body for? And it's something that, when you first assessed me, having been someone that trains a lot at the time, it's probably 2-3 years ago, 5, 6, 7 days a week, puts a lot of effort into training, but you sort of said to me, you've lost movement variant or variability. My body just wasn't moving in certain ways, and you'd expect someone that looks at me and performs at me to be able to have all the movement in the world, but I'd lost it because I wasn't training it. Now, then it comes down to, how do I prioritize the key things? So is it as simple as something far? So a plyo, what is the best plyo? Is it something sagittal plane, frontal plane, transverse plane in your warm up? Give me the...
Okay. Really simply, a couple of tests that I believe everyone should do that runs. Get a metronome app, set it at 50 beats per minute. On beep 1, you go down. On beep 2, you go up. We're going to do 3 different tests. We're going to do a single leg sit to stand to 90 degrees knee bend, where you just tap down and come back up. You're not stopping on the bench. You're going to do a single leg hamstring bridge, where your knees bent about 20 degrees, your heels on a bench or a chair, and you bridge up on beep 1, bridge down on beep 2, and a single leg calf raise from the floor, straight leg, fingertips on the wall. You're not gripping the wall and pulling yourself up. I want a minimum of 25 reps on each side with really good quality. That's what the research says is like normative data, but that's in a population from 18 to 60 to 70. I don't know the exact age. We push to 30 for a more athletic population.
So just so 30 reps on each of those exercises. So single leg sit to stand to 90 degrees.
Yep.
Single leg hamstring bridge near 90 degrees. 20 degrees.
Yep.
Heel into the floor, and single leg straight
heel
leg,
onto a bench.
Heel onto a bench.
Yeah.
And single leg straight leg calf raise.
Yep.
30 reps with a metronome at 50
beats per minute. Up on beat 1, down on beat 2. Yep. That's just to standardize the test.
Yep.
On the single leg sit to stands, I allow one failure. That failure would be tapping down the opposite or the non-working foot, just to account for balance on 1 rep. After that, if there's another touchdown, we stop. Beyond that, some more sort of very easy to complete tests. A split squat isometric, front knee and hip at 90 degrees, back knee and hip at 90 degrees, but obviously an extension. Off the floor by 2 to 3 inches, holding for a minimum of 90 seconds on each side. And then a side plank, long lever side plank, minimum of 90 seconds on each side. You'll take care of a lot of big rocks there. They're our capacity sort of testing markers. And that'll give you a really nice, stable or strong base to work from. Beyond that, I believe everybody should have at least 2 doses of plyometrics in a week. Hide them in a running warm-up. You can do them in 5 to 6 minutes, just a little bit of movement work into a couple of rounds of plyometrics, something like a double leg pogo, something like a lunge jump where you're switching the legs. Like it sounds old school, but there's a lot of really good things that carry over into running mechanics, like switching the hips, absorbing force in deep knee flexion, deep hip flexion positions, which people just don't do. And actually training an increased rate of force development through the muscular tendinous system. People just don't do it in traditional gym training. It's, right, let's make a strong and stable, stiff base as possible and push as much weight as possible. There's not those other physical qualities that are trained. And then we can add in a lateral variation. We can do a lateral bound, a skater bound. You can YouTube all of these or message me and I'll send you a video for it. But it's just an element of ankle stiffness, an element of a deep tier plyometric, and then some multi-directional plyometrics. Beyond that, a really solid training program, which is progressive in nature, doesn't need to be the most complex. It doesn't need to have loads of different nuance to it. It just needs to be progressive in nature, and you need to apply appropriate effort to it to progress. And within there, I would always want, depending on how many times you train a week, but an element of frontal plane and transverse plane lower body movement, whether that's a lateral lunge, not a Cossack. So one thing that is probably hard to describe over a podcast is if you lunge laterally and I'm lunging to my left, I want to get my center of mass, so my chest and my belly button, over my left big toe. So that tells me I'm shifting in the frontal plane. Whereas if I did that movement with my left foot outside of my left hip, I haven't actually loaded in the frontal plane into my hip. I haven't adducted or internally rotated my hip. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
And then something like a curtsy lunge, a curtsy reach, curtsy, that's hard to say quickly, a curtsy step up. Perfect.
Bring back the lunge jumps. The test that you mentioned at the top of that, so if someone doesn't have 30 reps, for example, they've got 20, then what?
You've identified an area of opportunity.
Fine. So that's then something you're going to prioritize then into your strength work.
Yeah. So we're talking about someone who isn't injured here.
Yeah.
I would never stop someone doing what they are doing because they haven't met X criteria. I would just encourage them to keep the main thing. And it might be that if we're talking about a more hybrid approach to training, running and lifting, you're currently running 15K a week. Okay, for the next 4 weeks, let's stay within 15 to 18K. We don't need to make massive jumps in volume, but rather than that progressive effort being placed there, let's place it on the strength training. And that's our main focus until we get to where we need to get to. I think it's important to know I wouldn't recommend someone doing plyometrics until they've hit a minimum of 10 single leg calf raises, single leg squats. I've never really found anyone that hasn't hit single leg hamstring bridges above 10, other than if they've cramped, which is more of a neuromuscular issue, and actually just spending more time in those positions with isometric type exercises is going to be really beneficial.
Can we just pick up on that cramp thing? Because that's something that's very prevalent in me. Why does someone get cramp?
Liam will be better talking about the hydration side of it.
Yeah.
I think definitely.
That's often the one that people lean to, right?
Exactly,
it could be a hydration thing. But if it wasn't a hydration thing, which it's not going to be if you're doing a hamstring bridge lying on the floor.
Yeah. I think if you're concerned about hydration, if you go to the loo and it's anything but really dark, you're absolutely fine. Beyond that, from a cramp perspective, the easy way of explaining it is like neuromuscular confusion. Your brain and nervous system, again, doesn't understand the task that you're trying to complete. So as a protective mechanism, it creates this spasm or this cramp to stop you doing what you're doing, because you haven't earned the right to hold that position in the way that you're trying to do it. So for a hamstring bridge, from a hamstring bridge perspective, if you're completing it well, and we can get a decent control of your pelvis, so the proximal hamstring is pulling the pelvis slightly posteriorly, and the hamstrings behind the knee, so the distal hamstrings are creating a bit of knee flexion, and we're shortening the hamstring at both ends. Quite often, that can cause someone to cramp because the brain doesn't know how to complete the task that you're asking it to do. And rather than be put in a stress position where there's potential for trauma, it'll go, right, stop what you're doing. Which is actually really interesting, because a lot of my assessment and the assessment we use as a company starts on the floor. And a lot of people fall short of those sort of tier 1 tests through cramp. When you think about everything playing into the same bucket, on the floor, your nervous system doesn't even have to fear falling over. It doesn't have to balance itself. Your vestibular system is very, very relaxed. So it isolates the tests even more. And then if you can't use your hamstring in that way, because it does relate to gait quite specifically in terms of mid-stance and different bits like that, imagine what's happening when you're stood upright. You're increasing the force demands because your foot's hitting the floor. I think the research, it's about 3.5 times body weight. They class it as slow running speed, but it's 430 per kilometre. So it's pretty quick, but they looked at it sprinting and stuff like that. There's huge amounts of force. There's the chaos of the environment that's going on around you. If you're just out for a run, you're watching the people in front of you. You might be crossing a road. You might be the camber on the curve, whatever it is. There's so many different layers to it. But you need to pass the tier 1 foundation tests to then go from lying to standing.
And is it just a case of then, if you are cramping through one of those tests, it's just more exposure, to that position over time?
That is a option. Obviously, it depends. I find myself saying that quite a lot in my world. It might be that there's an unresolved issue or an unidentified issue, pathology-wise or non-pathology. It might be something in your history, your injury history, that we need to address further down or up the chain. But yes, actually spending more time in those positions is going to earn the right to be better at that exercise. It's going to build the strength, the control, etc., etc.
Let's keep on this idea of running. I think they're just using that as the context here, because I think that is the thing that most people are going to be experiencing. They're increasing their running volume because of high rocks and marathons, etc. I think people know how to prepare and warm up for strength training. I think strength training is pretty controlled. So we've mentioned there that sort of prep work, the plyos, etc. We've mentioned the test to do first, just to see where you're at. Is there anything you see missing from a program? And I don't want to tee up the answer too much, but what is missing from most people's strength training when it comes to the desire to want to run more?
I don't know where you were heading it, but the first thing that comes to mind for me is isometric type training. And there's some really good work by a guy called Frans Bosch, who's a strength and conditioning coach from the Netherlands. And he talks about muscle actions and things like that, and far more complex than I'm going to go into. But if you think about it, again, at a really simple level, in your strength training, you have an eccentric and a concentric component. You move down, you move up. When someone runs, you don't, well, one, you'd look pretty stupid if you had a large eccentric and a large concentric, but you'd also spend much more time on the floor, and then you'd actually run a lot slower. So the muscle actions, or the muscular tenderness unit, works far more isometrically. And there's a company that I work with quite closely and have used for a long time, even in sport, called Val, and they've got force plates and different pieces of tech that is fantastic. And they're now producing normative data for everyone from elite sports to team sports to everyday person of what certain isometric movements or tests. So they have something called a runner's ankle isometric, and they've got runner's isos, and there's a knee iso push, an ankle iso push, and a hip iso push, developed by a guy called Alex Morrell, who's a really good strength and conditioning coach from Australia. But they're producing normative data, and they're wanting people to hit team sports 4 times body weight on a knee iso push. And that's a lot of force, but that shows the demands that healthy populations are required and need to be exposed to. It's not that, think of it as a 10% drop from there to just the normal population, but it will make you more efficient and more effective as a runner, which in turn is going to reduce your chances of injury. And this is where you need to look at things with this performance hat. Like, a lot of people go, I don't want to get injured, I'm going to do less, I'm going to rest, I'm going to do my activation exercises, when actually you haven't built the foundation of strength that makes you perform better, makes you more resilient.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I think, it's quite typical of like someone from a strength background to cross over into this, strength and now running. And we're married to our 1RM back squat numbers. And, this is probably like 2 times body weight is respectable. But we don't necessarily, maybe because the access to the equipment just to test these things, but we don't necessarily place the same importance on, like that you said, 4 times body weight on the knee iso push.
Yeah. I guess you don't know what you don't know. And this tech and this kit is very new, and the data is even newer. And actually it's about now educating people on other options. And I guess there's a few barriers. It's the actual educational piece, but then people's willingness to go into a recreational gym and set up a runner's knee iso push, people are going to be like, what on earth are they doing? And it's breaking down that barrier. And again, it wouldn't bother me in the slightest. I've done some weird things in commercial gyms over the years that are from a strength and conditioning background, but for the everyday person, it's a big hurdle and a big challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something over the last couple of years where it's strange, right? Coming out of rugby, moved away from sort of performance-based training, probably got too caught up in just lifting and trying to look good. Now, given what I'm asking of my body with the running, etc., coming back to it, you do feel a little bit weird, like doing a runner's knee iso push and there being no back squats in your program, for example. But I'm certainly feeling the effects of it. I mean, this is the healthiest my body's felt for a long time, having been really diligent with it. So you mentioned that isometrics in the training program. I think that is something many people are going to overlook. I don't think there's many people holding isos in a gym now, given the increase in running. The other thing I was going to talk about is maybe just the isolated calf work. Sort of preface that by saying I've got the smallest, weakest calves in the world, but it's something that, again, I've noticed in the programming that it's something that is always in there. So if there was two things to take away, it's the ISOs, and someone can just go on YouTube and maybe look at like the best ISOs for running, for example.
Yeah.
Calf work, how many times a week, how many sets? Is there any sort of guide rails you can give us for that?
Yeah, definitely. I think to give a bit of context, the paper I'm talking to is by Dawn et al. You'll find it easily enough, and they'd look at peak force demands of different muscle groups during varying running speeds. And again, I always come back to this slow running speed, which is the 430 per kilometre. And from a calf group perspective, so the soleus and the gastroc is anywhere between 9 to 12 times body weight that's going to go through that group at that running pace. Now, you're never going to lift 9 to 10, 12 times your body weight in a calf raise, whatever variation you can give yourself as much stability as you want on a Smith machine and a single leg calf raise, all of this, but it needs to be progressive in nature, and you need to push it like you'd push your bench press and your back squat. It was only last week I was assessing a professional rugby player, and I said, "Oh, so you do your calf work?" He was like, "Yeah, diligently. I do my minimum of 8 sets a week." I was like, "Okay, cool. On your seated calf raise, what you doing?" He's like, "I don't know, like 30, 35. He's a 105 kilo back rower, professional rugby player." And I was like, "Well, why don't you do any more?" He went, "I just thought that was quite heavy." I was like, "I'm just going to give you some context. I'll do 60 to 70 kilos stacking plates until it's too awkward for me to keep loading it." And it was like a light bulb went off. It was like, why haven't I just kept progressing it? And it should, well, any exercise should just be treated with intent and progressive overload. Like, you're never going to, as long as your program is well balanced, you're never going to see a negative impact of getting stronger. But I think it's important, so going back to your question, minimum of 8 sets per week through different variation of bent leg and straight leg calf raises. If we can push up to 12, great. There's lots of research about the most effective amount of sets and frequency across a week, and it's pushed up obviously 16 to 24 sets. But I think actually looking at it practically for people that manage running and training together, and their primary thing isn't just about muscle building, you'll get a really good stimulus from 8 to 12 sets done with real intent, progressively overloading week on week. Now, the thing we need to think about is, and this is for me where the buy-in is to the plyometrics and the prep work, whether that's in the before a session or whether that is before a run, to bridge the gap from a 50 kilo seated calf raise to 9 times body weight when you run is plyometrics.
Really good. So again, just for take homes, so 8 to 12 sets, bent leg and straight leg variations. Are they single leg?
Single leg, yeah.
So always isolating one leg over the other?
I prefer that. Obviously, it doesn't really matter as long as it's progressively overloaded. I prefer it because it isolates, and say someone hasn't had the opportunity to be assessed and identify maybe different areas for opportunity and improvement, just doing the single leg work should start to close some of them gaps, and it might actually identify, you could use it as your own self-assessment. Or I can hit 50 on my left, but I can only hit 40 on my right. Right. I need to probably do an extra couple of sets, or even just an extra set on my right every single time I train until they catch up. And that doesn't mean you do less on the left. You still want to progressively overload that side. And this is a big rehab mistake that people make, is they go, I've got a 20% deficit from left to right, so I'm going to do less on my left. So actually, yes, you meet, but because you've done less on the left, you've deconditioned. So you've met at 45 rather than coming up to 50 and beyond and returning to play better than you were. And it's a big, big mistake that people make in any rehab. It's actually, we want to catch the good side and the non-affected side. We don't want to let that decondition and then kid ourselves that our limb symmetry index or our deficit from side to side is within 10%, when actually we've just got worse.
That brings me nicely onto this next question, which is kind of coming back to injury, because you picked up on it there, but I wanted to touch back to it. This notion of when someone is injured, and you see it just in like the everyday person coming into the gym, it's like, I can't train, I'm injured. One thing, I used myself as the example, ran the London Marathon 4 days later in Mykonos, tear my hamstring at the track. I've got you on speed dial. and sent the distress signal out to you and said, look, mate, I've done my hamstring. I think it's quite bad. When can we start? And you're like, here's the program for tomorrow. And I think people understanding that an injury doesn't mean everything has to stop, and whether that's training the uninjured side or training around it, or like you said, being able to prioritize aerobic work if you can't, train a limb, for example. That notion of people needing time off from the injury. Obviously, the injury needs to be let heal. There's maybe some swelling to account for, etc. But what can you give people in terms of confidence if you are injured? What should the next 1 to 3 to 7 days look like? Depending on the injury, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah. I firmly believe that every injury is an opportunity. And it's something that I instill into my team and that I encourage my team to instill into our clients because, can I swear?
Yep.
Getting injured is shit. It is. Like, nobody wants to do rehab, but it's an opportunity to, one, focus on other things. Let's say hamstring tear, for example. Yes, we need to protect the injured site and we need to load the injured site appropriately, but you might have a goal associated with pull-ups. You might have a goal with stacking some muscle on your upper body. You can now place more energy and effort into that channel. It might even be, I want to focus on my business for the next 4 weeks. It doesn't have to be a physical pursuit that is the opportunity, but it's actually just going and changing the lens of, this is shit, I'm injured, the world's ending, I can't do anything. It's actually, right, where is the opportunity? Where can I make improvements, both personally, physically, professionally, whatever it may be? Outside of that, there's always something you can do. As long as, and the context I would give around that, as long as you're protecting the injured site, if you've got a wound from surgery and things like that, you do not want to be sweating. You do not want to be risking it. Like, even last week, we had to pull one of our clients up. He'd gone in and done stuff, and we were just like, right, just chill. The worst thing you'll get is an infection. Just give yourself a stable base to start from. But beyond that, there's always something you can do. Right? Whether it's low-level isometric, just to slowly start loading that area. Whether we're training the other side, there's something called the crossover effect. So you can train a couple of times a week, typically three sets of 5 at really high intensity, RP 8, 9, pushing it. And the actual deconditioning on the injured limb will be reduced from anywhere between 20 to 30%, i.e. it will keep 20 to 30% of what it would have lost if you didn't do that on the other side. So there's the psychological piece around keeping moving, keeping training, doing the things that you enjoy doing in the environments that you enjoy doing. But actually, the things you do as early as is appropriate are going to have a positive gain and a positive long-term impact on your injury recovery.
The follow-on question was around the psychology around injury. Like, what should people's mindset towards injuries be? But I think you've touched on that nicely, unless there's anything else to add.
It's so hard. Like, we spend more time talking to our clients, particularly so we have something called our Pro Recovery Plan, which we take over everything, and we work really closely and intimately with our clients, but we spend more time talking to them about the psychological element of it and managing expectations and feelings and thoughts and emotions than we do going, here's why you're doing this exercise and this many sets and reps, because it is so challenging. It's your identity changes. Like, you might go from training twice a day, posting it on Instagram, it's a big part of your life and things like that, to, right, for the next 2 weeks, you just need to chill. And it's a really tough transition for people. And whether that's you who works out at this high level, or Sandra who does 3 sessions a week, but loves going to the gym because she has a coffee with her friends afterwards. And now she can't do that. It's meaningful on so many different levels to different people.
It did. It did. Once I sort of talked to that period of like finishing rugby, and I didn't really do anything in terms of my fitness, in terms of really pushing myself. So didn't really get injured for 4 or 5 years. As I started like getting a bit more competitive and towing the line a little bit more, I sort of picked up injuries. And you do kind of think, particularly as a fitness professional and someone that's supposed to be super fit and super capable, when you get injured, you are kind of, it's a bit of a dent to your ego. You're a bit like, fuck, like, because you found, I mean, obviously you frame it as an opportunity, but you found a weakness, or you've done something your body wasn't quite capable of. But certainly over recent years, I've begun just to understand that, whilst, of course, I don't want to get injured, I'm not seeking injury. I am seeking to try and toe the line and to ride the right side of the line. But sometimes, you just drift the other side, and it is it's a shame, but it does become an opportunity. And I think every time I've got injured, and particularly working with you, I've been able to come back and focus on things to bring back a more complete, well-rounded athlete. So it certainly has been opportunities.
Definitely, and I think it's the whole. The point of training and the supercompensation effect is you lose fitness to gain fitness. And what I mean by that is you're striving to create adaptation, but as a result of that, you are towing the line, like you say. And I think especially it's important for people that get frustrated with niggles. And a niggle would be something that you can feel, but it's not stopping you from training. Well, it's actually like, is that just normal for someone who is really pushing their body to its hardest capability to create a positive adaptation? And I would argue yes. I personally don't think there'd be anybody that never feels an ache, pain, or a niggle. Even if you did nothing, you'd probably feel stiff from lying in bed all day. And it's a really unique. I have some really unique conversations with people around it at both ends of the spectrum, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said this to you before. I think from 16 years old, there's not a day that I haven't woke up in pain or with a niggle. You kind of learn to deal with it. I want to wrap up on testing. It's something you're obviously very big on. We've touched on it with the valve stuff. How important is it for someone to be able to get that baseline data and objectively kind of see where they're at? As I've referenced, people in the strength world, we go through testing protocols, we go through testing weeks, we kind of know where we sit. When it comes to kind of this side of the fence with running, or even these tests cross over into strength training very well as well. People either don't have the access to it or don't place as much importance on it. So why is testing so important?
I think it's really valuable for a number of reasons. There's the psychological side of it, of actually a big part of going through a rehab process and getting injury free is the psychological confidence, restoring that confidence and that reassurance that your body isn't broken, you're not fragile. And I think if you just felt better, and I know this from a lot of conversations, there's always that second guess of, I might feel better, but am I better? And I think that the testing provides that piece of reassurance and that confirmation that I can show you this is where you were, this is where you are now, and this is where you needed to be. You've completed this process successfully, and here's what you need to do to continue at least maintaining that. But ideally, we want to get fitter and stronger over time. And I think there's the psychological bit, but I think from the physical side of things, as the research base grows, and I'll come back to ACLs because it's a big injury, and I think it's quite easy to maybe understand some of the concepts of it. Traditionally, ACL rehab was a time-based rehab. At 12 weeks, you do this. At 24 weeks, you do this. You return to play at 12 months. There's been some research recently that came out that basically shows if you hit the physical testing criteria, you are at no more risk of re-injury, even if you go back at 6 months. And it's actually right. We just need to better prepare people for the physical demands that they're trying to complete, or the tasks that they're trying to complete. And the testing is the thing that gives us the objective data in front of us that doesn't lie to us of, this is where you are, this is what you're trying to do. And if you make a silly decision in between that, I've at least informed you as best possible, and I've shown you the journey that you need to take on. Or if I've done my job well, I've communicated it well, I've shown you the journey that you need to take to get to where you want to get to safely, effectively, and continue doing that for months, years in advance.
Yeah, I think wrapping up and speaking of testing, because we're going to go do some now, it's kind of that, right? We spoke at the top about trying to make physio sexy. You can always set a goal with your rehab, whether it's the testing. Something I've learned to love, with the testing that we've done, seeing the discrepancies left and right, it frustrates you. If you're performance orientated, if you want to try and improve, there's always things in your training that you can improve, whether it's being able to hold isometrics longer, being able to hit the test of 30 reps in the metronome. These are all little unlocks that are going to build a more complete athlete. So I think people need to view rehab or even, prior to injury, the prehab, the preparation stuff as performance outcomes that they can improve. As I said at the top, you've been instrumental in my training over the last couple of years. Where can people find you if they want to hear more?
Head over to Alex Morrell Physio on Instagram. Feel free to drop me questions. I enjoy being in the DMs.
Nice. Thank you, mate.
I appreciate you having me on, mate.